story is from Autumn Gemstone. Never. Ruin. You. Sisters. Prom. Dress. Disclaimer. It's not my story, it's a friend's. I don't condone it either, so please don't shoot the messenger. I make no claims of nobility in her actions, nor do I defend them. So this takes place when I was 16, wide-eyed, full of wonder, and, much to a lot of judges' displeasures, unable to be tried as an adult. I had myself a big brother we'll call Elio, and like many big brothers at the time, he was coming to terms with his flowering sexuality, among other things that went shooting up from otherwise flat surfaces whenever Robin appeared on screen in Batman Forever. He did his best to keep it a secret, plastering Playboy centerfolds over his Ariana Grande posters and stoically sitting through the game with my dad during Super Bowl parties, albeit through gritted teeth, probably wishing he could watch a Britney Spears music video instead. But much like a Nintendo Switch under the tree on Christmas Eve, you can't keep something this major under wraps for long where nosy kids are involved. The nosy kid in this case being me. Like many twins who came before him upon discovering an alternative lifestyle from the rigid confines of toxic heterosexual masculinity, Elio took it upon himself to explore his feminine side with all the zeal and passion of a prophet with a message. Mount Hira, in this scenario, being a nightclub bathroom, while the angel Jibril was a 6.6 YMCA trainer who spelled his name Johnny with an I. Ironically, this eagerness to play up the girly shtick was how he came to succumb to the worst sin you can commit as a brother, stealing your sister's clothes. A message to all the gay men reading this. Her wardrobe is not your experimental laboratory, and you aren't Dr. Frankenstein. Now, in my defense, if Elio had the decency to just ask me to borrow my stuff, under the guise of shopping for some made-up girlfriend with the same shoe size, choice colors, choice height as myself, I'd have happily obliged. Heck, if he had just offered himself up as a sacrificial lamb modeling for my startup clothing line, 16-year-old me considered herself a fashionista with a penchant for designing outfits and recycling her wardrobe to bring them to life, I'd have been all too eager to be his guide into the world of women's fashion. But the two-faced bastard opted to sneak into my closet and try on my stuff without permission. He thought he was being slick putting them back when he was done, but I was a petite woman's zero, and he was a men's medium. Now, had he simply owned up to being incompatible with my measurements and admitted his crime to me the first time, I might have restrained from the retribution I'd go on to unleash. But instead, he continued to indulge in his deluded fantasy that we were the same size, and for weeks, I'd try on my clothes only to find them grotesquely stretched out of shape, with no explanation. I tried hiding my clothes in parts of the closet I didn't think the thief would check, only for him to find them. I began sleeping with my favorite clothes like a stuffed animal, but even my embrace couldn't protect them from being warped beyond wearability. I started hiding my junior prom dress under the bed. At one point, I was low-key, starting to consider the possibility that I was beginning to shrink. And had I not come home early from a cancelled SAT prep session one afternoon, my tutor got wind of a family emergency halfway through, this story might have otherwise ended with me in a straitjacket begging some burned-out shrink to save me before I went microscopic. But fate had other plans. I made a beeline for my room to find sounds coming from behind the door. Upon realizing that I was bearing witness to the dastardly clothing deformer, I hid in the bathroom in the corridor and peeked through a crack in the door for the culprit to leave my room. Imagine my shock when I discovered it was Elio. To my horror, I watched him go under my bed to place something there, and upon his departure, my worst fears were confirmed. He had tried on my beloved prom dress. Earlier in the week, I had bragged to him about the lengths I had gone to hide it from the closet ghost, thinking it would go through one ear and out the other with him, and just wanting an excuse to flex on how smart I was to take extra precautions. I storm in, demanding to know why he was wearing my clothes. He condescendingly tells me that he looks better in them than I do. I was heartbroken to find that the zipper had broken, and the fit was horribly mangled. I went down in tears, begging for my mom to tell me it could be salvaged, only for her to tell me what I prayed she wouldn't. She wasn't particularly sympathetic. Thinking I had done the damage myself, and refused to buy me another one. I demanded that Elio pay me back for the dress so I could buy another, but he gave me less than half of what it cost. He refused to believe that it cost more than what I said it did, and unfortunately, my mom didn't have the receipt to prove it on account of being a bit scatterbrained when it comes to keeping track of payments. When I threatened to tell her that he was the one who ruined the dress, he laughed and said they'd never believe me. In spite of my rage and fury sending me into a frenzy of hysterics, I still knew he was right. The two-faced bastard deserved an Oscar for his straight facade, and even if he was prancing around in a rainbow unitard singing Born This Way by Lady Gaga, my folks were the type who would deny his gayness right up until the moment they came home to find him getting jackhammered on the kitchen table by a Puerto Rican bodybuilder. I realized that if I wanted to get even, I needed my own plan or action, and that was to hit him where it hurt. But where exactly is the weak spot on your brother when his standard boy ones have long since gone numb from an overuse of flashlights and his rectal cavity as a storage unit? The answers lay in his phone. After several weeks of casually walking behind the couch every time Elio whipped out his phone on it, I finally figured out his phone pin. He always locked his room, but thanks to some YouTube tutorials on how to pick a basic door lock with a bobby pin, that problem quickly resolved itself. Every time Elio went to shower, I'd sneak in and hack his phone, giving myself a 15-minute crash course on all things valued by you typical bottom. It turns out he fancied himself the next biggest thing in the drag scene. He was using my outfits to cement his status as the rising star of the social media drag scene. I thought about deleting his account, but I didn't want him suspecting me of it and tattling to my folks. Besides, he could always just create a new one and start over again. He liked Drag Race, K-pop, and iced coffee, but I couldn't exactly ruin his chances of getting on the show, and in the digital age, he had no CDS to smash or switch out. Of course, there was always the option of spiking his coffee with something nasty, but I wanted him to feel the pain I did. And that pain simply wasn't comparable to a wasted $5.99 plus tax. I was about to concede defeat after about 2 weeks of trying to find something when I discovered he downloaded Grindr. After my initial revulsion to the app, no, not because I was a homophobe, but because his profile and was full of his nudes, regardless of what he was into, I didn't find my brother's ding-dong appealing. I doubt any sister does. Elio wasn't really into hookups, but apparently he did like sending nudes to whoever asked for them. It's important to note that he always blurred or blacked out his face for privacy, and he appeared to color in the background of all his pictures with the image editing on his phone post-production, and he always kept his location on never. I suddenly understood why he had taken to hogging the bathroom for up to 20 minutes over the weekend. I just assumed that he was just paying the price for going to Chipotle every Friday with friends, but now I knew. He was basically trying to find the best angles for his customers. And just like that, I finally had a plan. What I did next was not something I'm proud of, but I was bitter, hurting, and desperate for payback. Not making excuses, just telling it like it is. I downloaded Grindr onto my own phone and created a fake account. I used some stock photo of a six-pack for my profile and punched in a bunch of fake info, including a spoof GPS location, shoot out to the internet for walking me through the process. I knew it would really make a difference to my brother. He didn't really seem to care who was getting his naughty pics so much as how cute he looked in them. The boy fancied himself a bit of a male model, and I guess he decided Grindr was the best place to get a feel for the industry. Anyways, over the course of several weeks, I became one of his regulars, routinely asking him for pics, all of which I promptly deleted upon receiving. I messaged him so frequently and stroked his ego the way I knew he liked it to be stroked. I had gone through enough of the chats backed up on his phone to know what kind of compliments made him more likely to keep sending stuff instead of just getting bored and blocking someone after the second or third time he sent them pics before moving on to someone else. I boiled what made him tick down to a science, and it wasn't long before I had him eating out of the palm of my hand. Eventually, I had earned a spot in his heart as one of his exclusives. At my suggestion, we'd start having sessions where we'd schedule times for him to flood my basement sending me caches of pics he'd taken over the course of the week, while I would live chat my reaction as to the effect they had on me. It was gross, and I always felt nauseous afterwards, but I wasn't going to let squeamish scruples stand between my revenge. Not after how far I'd come. The next phase of my plan involved my search on Pornhub for a porn star who sounded similar to my dad, with a nice loud battle cry. Do you guys see where this is going? If you want to back out now, no one will blame you. Who was typically paired up with pillow princesses with considerably softer. Eventually, after several fruitless searches ending with me crying in a fetal position, asking myself how much longer I could keep this up, and if it was worth it, followed by the world's most twisted pep talk about how I was a fighter who could do it. Basically, think that scene from Joker, where Arthur puts on his clown makeup crying, and you've got something of an allegory for my struggle. I finally found a guy who sounded similar enough to my dad. I downloaded several videos featuring him roughhousing with some anorexic 20-somethings onto my laptop, strung them together with some crude online video editing app, converted it to audio, and separated my leading man's climactic hollers from the soft whimpers. I saved the file on my computer under the codename Brand New Take on Oedipus. Last but not least, I approach my dad under the guise of needing his help for a school project, while my brother is off with his friends. I tell him I'm acting out a one-woman play for my drama midterm, and I need him to be the voice of my protagonist's off-screen father. I ask him to recite a series of lines for me to record on my phone, all the while encouraging him to say them naturally. These lines include, but aren't limited to, "I told you not to disturb me. What is it? Is everything all right? Now isn't a good time to talk." And, most importantly, I finished my work, so I think I'll head out to join the rest of the family at the movie theater. See you later. I move the audio files onto my laptop and eagerly anticipate approaching the turning point of my master plan. One Saturday morning, I had arranged for a session in which my folks would be out of the house and I'd be with them. Or so Elio thought. You see, my mum, dad, and younger brother were all going to the park near my house on a typical family outing. We'd go to the park, then take a walk around the local lake, and maybe catch a movie if we felt like it. We usually go around 4 to 5-ish and come back at night. I know that today will be a movie day because my baby brother has been nagging my folks to go see some kids' movie for a while, which he learned was out this weekend courtesy of yours truly. Before I left the house, I made sure my bedroom door was wide open, important for later. While at the park, I asked to play on my dad's phone, citing a low battery on mine to explain why I couldn't use it. Then I sent Elio a text telling him that Dad had just received a call from his boss telling him he had some extra work he needed to finish. I was going to be in my office across the hall from his room and could not under any circumstance be disturbed as I had a lot of stuff to do and very little time to finish it before the deadline. I waited to make sure he had read the text and sent me a thumbs-up emoji in response before I told my folks that I wanted to head back home on account of me getting an early visit from the lady in red. Not one to stand between a lass and her time of the month, my dad let me go home. Feeling like a ninja, I returned to the house, all the while sending Elio my reactions to what we'll call his cute little peach. We had technically already started the session 15 minutes ago. I crept into the house, snuck into my room on tiptoes. Thanks to my open door, I didn't have to worry about Elio hearing the creak of it from inside his room. They were next to each other. Praying he didn't come out for any reason in time to find me, I retrieved my laptop and the Bluetooth speaker I used to listen to music in the shower, and tiptoed into my dad's office, now making sure to close the door and lock it with enough force for him to hear from inside his room where I knew he was sending me the pics. I then sent Elio a text apologizing for being stuck doing something stupid, but now you've got my undivided attention, baby. Now it's time for the grand finale, in more ways than one. First, I connect my currently muted laptop to my Bluetooth speaker, which I've put at maximum volume in advance. Then, I open the Oedipus file and start to run it, while I text more and more raunchy and unhinged reactions to the incoming pictures. Just as we're approaching the end of the video containing the loudest yell, I saved the best for last, I text Elio that he's making me come so hard like the little slut he is, just in time to turn up the volume to the loudest setting on my laptop, right before the Tarzan-like whoop of passion I know is around the corner. The scream played loudly enough to break the sound barrier. Calling it merely loud was the understatement of the century. It was enough so for me to have to cover my own ears despite putting on earplugs in advance. I wouldn't have been surprised if the neighbors heard. I wouldn't be surprised if people in Siberia heard. But one thing was certain. There was no way my brother didn't. I shut off the Oedipus file, lower the volume, and keep my finger on the recordings of my dad's voice. At first, nothing happens. All is silent, not unlike the universe before the Big Bang. The mounting tension would have been enough to send me into a heart attack had I implemented this scheme in my 50s. It takes every ounce of my will not to scream from the suspense. The agony is pure torture. I feel paralyzed in anticipation, but I force myself to turn my attention to the grinder chat. I will myself to repeatedly punch in questions asking why Elio stopped sending pics all of a sudden, while keeping my ears alert for any hint of a noise from beyond the door. Time crawls to a standstill. Then, just when I begin to wonder if the lack of results stems from me losing my grip on reality from the stress of waiting, I hear the creak of a door turning on its hinges. The sound is faint enough to make me question its existence. By now, I'm almost painfully adjusted to the waiting period. Enough to the point where part of me almost wants to deny hearing it out of fear of whether or not I'll react subtly enough not to blow my cover if it's real. But it can't possibly have been real. And then I hear something else. Foot's toes across the room. It's soft, timid and hesitant, but very much present. Knock, knock, knock. I take a deep breath and prepare to play one of the tapes. The following conversation ensues. Elio on the other side of the door. Dad's pre-recorded voice. Elio, Dad, are you in there? Dad, I told you not to disturb me. What is it? Elio, how long have you been in there? Dad, I've been in here for a while. Elio, I heard a scream. Is everything okay? Dad, oh yeah. I screamed because I dropped something on my foot. I specifically encouraged my dad to say this line like he was hiding something. I'm okay now, though. Don't worry about me. Elio. Okay, if you say so. Dad. I love you. Elio. Yeah, me too, I guess. I hear Elio go back into his room, and within seconds, I hear a notification for the grinder chat. He apologizes for the delay, and like the putty in my hands, I know he is. Says exactly what I was banking on him to. Elio, you're not going to believe this, but my dad is in the next room and I heard him screaming at the same time you told me you were coming LOL. And now commences what I believe the French refer to as the pied de résistance. I leave him on read and tiptoe downstairs with my apparatus while he waits for a response. Quiet, as a mouse. Then I set up my laptop and speaker for one last audio blast. I put on my shoes and chill out for a few minutes watching his texts get more and more hysterical, begging me to respond with, "Lol, that's so weird," and to assure him it was all a coincidence. A merciful sister would have realized that avenging her dress shouldn't come at the cost of her brother's peace of mind, and come clean about the prank. I sent the following text to him. Elio, we are never going to speak of this. Not to your mom, not to your siblings, not to me. If you attempt to bring it up, you will no longer be allowed to stay in this house. We are going to put this incident behind us and go about as if nothing happened. I want you to delete your account on this website and every single picture that you posted on it. If you know what's good for you, never go back on the app again while living under my roof. Then I blocked him before the final phase of my plan. From downstairs, I blast up both volume settings and fire up the last line I asked my dad to record. I finished my work, so I think I'll head out to join the rest of the family at the movie theater. See you later. This time, I hear Elio respond, "Wait, what?" From upstairs, I can hear him coming down. Now it's time to kick it into high gear. I shove my laptop and speaker into a cabinet under the sink, jam my feet into my shoes, and sneak out through the back door and hide behind the shed. After a few hours, my folks appear in the driveway and I rush out to welcome them back and come inside, as though I was with them the whole time. His relationship with my dad was never quite the same afterwards, and many a night for years to come, I overheard father bemoan his non-existent relationship with his little slugger. Elio ended up moving out less than a year after the prom dress incident. He finally came out via a Facebook post a week after settling into his new apartment. He blocked my parents on every social media platform and went completely NC. Any attempts on my dad's part to reignite their father-son bond was met with cold apathy and indifference when Elio wasn't flat out refusing to talk to him. For years, the only time they ever met in person was at extended family get-together. I felt a bit bad for my dad, but it worked out in the end. Elios' determination to distance himself from my dad resulted in him growing closer to me as a result. I think he didn't want to risk losing his other kids the way he did his oldest. In all honesty, I'd have been happy to let Elio fester in guilt and shame for the rest of his life. We were never really close growing up, and the prom dress incident was nothing more than the tiniest of tips on the largest of icebergs. But over the years, our relationship slowly mended, and perhaps it could have evolved into something that roughly resembled a healthy sibling relationship had he not tried to take over my wedding planning and revealed his own plans to get a free engagement ceremony, coming out party, by hijacking my reception with a proposal to his then boyfriend. I tried to reason with him, but his unyielding stubbornness forced me to pull the reverse card I hoped I'd never have to use. I sent him a text revealing that all this time Dad had no idea he was gay, and that I was the one talking to him on Grindr. I concluded my message with a warning: if he showed up, I'd have security escort him out, and afterwards I'd tell the whole family that he sexted his sister in high school, and I had the nudes to prove it. I never kept any, but he didn't know that. He might have been able to reveal I was a liar had he not deleted his old Grindr from back then. I then blocked him on all platforms before he had a chance to reply. He didn't come to the wedding. I never saw him again, and my quality of life greatly improved as a result of his absence in it. TLDR: my closeted brother secretly starts wearing my clothes in order to boost his presence as a social media drag personality. He ruins my prom dress as a result and refuses to pay me back for it when confronted. I catfish him on Grindr and trick him into believing he was sending nudes to my dad. His relationship with my family falls apart after I threaten him to never speak of what happened. I let him boil alive for years with what he thinks is his scandalous little secret, until I get engaged, and he tries to take over my wedding and use it to propose to his boyfriend. I revealed to him that I was the one pretending to be our dad all those years ago, then threatened to show his boyfriend and the rest of my family all the nudes he sent me, and accuse him of being an incestuous, perverted if he comes to the ceremony, before I block him. Honestly speaking, it was not revenge, but rather a naked injustice and unfairness on the part of OP, which cannot be justified. This heavy toll for sneaking into OP's closet is just unfair. The next story is from Wrecker Knight. Look at this giant hole you dug for yourself. Now watch as I bury you in it. Hello Reddit, long-time lurker and commentor, first-time posting. This occurred back in the late 90s in Australia, so Aussie terms will be used. Please do not share, Josh used this in your YouTube or other social media platforms without my explicit permission first. Names will be changed to protect those involved. This is a very long one, so the TLDR is at the bottom. I was in my third and final year at uni, studying archaeology. Due to recurring and severe illness in the second semester of my second year, I had been unable to complete several core subjects and had to repeat them. This included an archaeological field school, held in the mid-year holidays, where you would implement the techniques you had already learned. This field school was compulsory if you wished to enroll in a particular subject, but not everyone studying was headed in that direction. I had successfully completed the previous year's field school, but due to my illness, was unable to complete the associated course, so had to retake them both again. This university has a number of campuses dotted around the country and some overseas. The field school is offered to students on 2 campuses: the main campus, located north of Capricorn, and one of its offshoots, located even further north of Capricorn. The field schools are held in the area of the main campus, so those participating are required to travel to attend. For some, it's across town. For others, it's several hours in a car. Needless to say, those attending from the sister campus do not do so lightly or cheaply. My lecturer, whom we shall call Matt, was a bloody legend. He was a brilliant lecturer, has authored 2 books, and is still working in his field, albeit at a different university than the one in this story. He knew his was easygoing, friendly, would sit and share a jug of beer with you on a Friday avro. And I only ever saw him angry once. This is important for later. Also note that grading went as follows, in descending order: HD, pass with high distinction, 85, 100%. D, pass with distinction, 75, 84%. C, pass with credit, 65, 74%. P, pass, 50, 64%. PC, pass conceded, 48, 49%. N, fail, 50%. The event. Matt and his counterpart at the sister campus had been granted permission to conduct this particular year's field school in a gully adjacent to an historic and protected, listed cemetery. This gully actually split the cemetery in 2 and was used basically as a garbage maiden. Due to the nature of the gully, there was only space permitted for a specified number of dig sites. Groups were to be allocated a site once they arrived on the first day, after they had decided on their members. As I was living on campus and had no car, I knew I'd be unable to arrive at the field school at the specified beginning times. I'd be half an hour late on the Friday and Monday mornings, and a full hour late on the weekend. I'd spoken to Matt about this, and as we knew each other quite well, and had shared jugs of beer quite often, he agreed that I would not be penalised for arriving late, but that I'd most likely be allocated a group to make up numbers rather than choose my own. It couldn't be helped, so I agreed. This is also important for later. Friday rolls around. I arrive at the site a half hour late, all good, and I'm introduced to my group. There are 4 of us, myself, the only female in the group, but experienced in how the field school is run due to my previous year. Gaza, an older, grizzled male geology student who was taking the course just as a matter of interest. Baza, a young male geology student who, by all other indications, was heading towards a lucrative career in the mining sector. And Daza, another young male geology student, good friends with Baza, also heading towards a lucrative career in the mining sector. All 3 of my counterparts were from the sister campus, so had travelled at some expense to attend. They'd already been allocated a dig site, and when introduced, Matt tells them I've got field school experience, so to utilise my knowledge. Badza and Daza smile and nod, giving me a friendly wave. Gaza grunts, but a little later, while surveying our area, we get to chatting. He's a nice enough bloke, just a bit miffed he's been put in a group with a bunch of young shits, and was worried he'd be carrying us or keeping us in line. Nah, mate, I'm here to get shit done, get the data I'll need for next semester, and hopefully enjoy myself as much as I had the previous year. Now, let me tell you, Lara Croft and Indiana Jones have royally the perception of the greater public when it comes to archaeology. No, Jurassic Park doesn't count, as they're paleontologists dealing with animal remains. Archaeologists deal with human remains. A lot of what happens on an archaeological dig is repetitive and monotonous. You survey your area using surveying equipment, sketch and take photos of your allocated site before measuring out your 1 metre by 1 metre dig pit. You take more pictures, chalked sketches of the as-yet untouched pit, as well as taking an initial soil sample. You scrape off a spit of earth. This is a layer of a predetermined depth, in this case 5 centimetres, and once done, you test the pH levels of the soil you've removed, documenting everything that you've scraped up. Yep, more photos and sketches. Before taking more photos, show sketches of the pit, and anything that may be lodged in there before scraping off another spit. If you hit an object, you remove the soil from around it, but don't actually remove the object until you are removing the layer of soil from beneath it. It must remain in situ to preserve the data. Boring, I know, but is also very important for later. Also important to note is soil composition in relation to how deep you can safely dig your pit before extending the boundaries to prevent soil contamination or the walls collapsing. Our dig site had quite loose, sandy soil, so it was announced that every 50 centimetres down, we would have to extend the sides of the pit by 50 centimetres on each side. It wasn't anticipated that we'd get much beyond 1 metre down, definitely not further than 1.5 metres, so we'd only need to expand once, possibly twice. This was how they had divvied up the entire site to fit us all in. It became very clear very quickly that neither Bazza or Dazza had anticipated how monotonous the next 4 days were going to be. Both Gazza and I had to repeatedly call them over to assist us with surveying, and when it came to the soil scraping, they were excited at first, but then became bored as we had to yet again record every minute detail. As I was the only one who had thought to bring my camera along, one that required actual film, as this was before inexpensive digital cameras, smartphones were at least 10 years away, and I was a Pivot Uni student. I was the one responsible for taking photos. This included candid shots of the entire field school, other groups, the lecturers, and our dig site. Day 1 of the field school ends, and we all head back to wherever for the night to kick back, relax, and prepare for another day of toil. The next morning, Saturday, I arrive at the field school 1 hour late, so at 10 a.m., as per the bus schedule. Seeing as how I'd already had this okayed by Matt, I'm not anticipating any issue with my tardiness. I get to the cemetery, and seeing Matt, give him a cheery, "Morning, Matt, all good, yeah?" Matt turns and glowers at me. I mean, if looks could kill, I'd be right at home in that cemetery with all the other dead people. You know how I mentioned earlier how easygoing and laid-back Matt is, and I've only ever seen him angry once? Well, this was that time. Matt was pacing, teeth grinding, fists clenched. He was pissed. "Just get to your group and get to work." Matt practically snarled at me. I'm worried now that he's angry with me for being late, even though we'd previously squared it. I'm nervous and worried because we'd had a really good rapport in the past, and now I'm thinking that I've done something that's going to make my last semester at uni hell on earth. Have I done something wrong? I know I was late, but like I told you before the field school, this was the first bus I could get out here. I'm really sorry if that's a problem. Matt sighs and shook his head. "No, Reckonite, it's not you. You've done nothing wrong. I just can't deal with it right now, so just go to your dig site and get on with it. I'll talk to you later." I head to my dig site, and what I find there almost has me in tears. When we'd packed up the previous day, our pit was 1 metre by 1 metre square with a depth of 30 centimetres. I now stand before a 1 metre by 1 metre hole in the ground, dug down to a depth of approximately 3 metres. There are mounds of sandy dirt surrounding our pit, and I can see a multitude of objects that have been excavated just sitting there. Other groups are staring at us, but trying to look as though they aren't staring. Nobody will speak to us either. Gaza is livid. The dude is almost apoplectic. Bazza and Gaza are both looking very pale, and like they want to puke. I'm all, what the ever-loving f*** happened here? Who the f*** did this? It turns out that after everyone had left the site on the Friday night, Bazza and Dazza and another mate of theirs in another group, we'll call him Keza, got together and got on the piss. It was during this that they decided to continue digging our pit, so they broke into the cemetery with a shovel and proceeded to dig down until one of them passed out shit-faced at the bottom of a 1 metre by 1 metre hole in loose, sandy soil. The fact that the dude managed to wake up and make it out of the hole without the entire thing collapsing in on him is a miracle in itself. Matt had been called out to the site at 3 a.m. by the police, who had been called because one of the residents in the area saw something dodgy going on. Needless to say, Bazza, Dazza, and Keza were all up shit creek in a barbed wire canoe with a rusty teaspoon for a paddle. They couldn't leave until they'd sobered up, but had been told that, in no uncertain terms, after the field school finished that day, they were to pack up and off. Matt and his counterpart would deal with booting them from the archaeological program on the Tuesday, after the field school ended. This left Gaza and I in a foobar situation. Luckily for him, Gaza was able to join the group that Keza had been part of, especially since the group were all from the sister campus. I, on the other hand, was left hanging like an unwanted tampon string out of the gusset of a bikini. There were no other groups that could take me, and besides, something had to be done about the cluster that was my dig site. So, Saturday ended up with me trying to document whatever I could, and to keep Bazza and Dazza out of my hair, I gave them my camera and told them to take photographic documentation of every single piece of evidence that they had dug up. They had to use the scale measurement and a title board that was supposed to identify the item by date, location, spit level, etc. So off they went with a miniature whiteboard, whiteboard marker, scale measurement, and my camera. This kept them occupied for most of the day, as there were in excess of 200 items that they'd unearthed in their drunken dig for buried whatever the they were looking for. I ended up filling in that hole wishing with every shovelful of soil that Bazza and Dazza were still passed out drunk at the bottom, but such is life. Matt ended up tacking me onto another group in an observational role, as the members of that group were all from my campus and would be in the same second semester class as me. The revenge? Now, as I previously mentioned, the field school was linked to another class held during the second semester. This class essentially took all of the data and evidence that had been unearthed during the field school, and you examined, tested, collated, and then submitted a report based on those findings as your final assessment piece. Seeing as how I only had 1 day's worth of actual data and evidence, I could not submit the field school report as required. As this was a core class, and I didn't want to have to retake it for a third year, I approached Matt to talk about how we could rectify this into a situation where I would be able to pass and continue with my studies. After some discussion, Matt agreed to allow me to do a field school critique, using what had happened to me as essentially a how-to on how not to participate in a field school. I had the data from the first day to use in the class, and then the photos and sketches taken by myself and the Dodgy brothers, Bazza and Dazza, of the objects we'd excavated. After developing the film of the field school, I noticed some interesting things. The candid photos I took on the Friday included shots of Bazza and Dazza not only behaving inappropriately, but interfering with the equipment we were using and therefore possibly contaminating the data we had legitimately acquired. They were also shown to be in areas that we weren't allowed to be in, touching things that didn't belong to them, and also damaging ornaments left on some of the historic graves closest to the dig site. Then there were the photos that they had taken on the Saturday. They had apparently decided that, because I wasn't overjoyed by the fact that they'd completely screwed me over by digging that hole, they'd make the only photographs of the artifacts they'd unearthed unusable by writing inappropriate comments and cursing slurs towards me on the title board. One of the ones that has stuck in my head was a large clay ceramic clam decoration, on which they'd written, "Oh, I do love a day beside the seaside," with a hairy clam. This was the only photo of the clam that had been taken. When we filled the pits back in, we had to re-enter the artifacts, so I couldn't just take a new picture. Also, over 200 pieces had been unearthed, remember? And Matt had told me to use everything I'd gathered to write my report. So I used every single photo, including the ones that said I was a cunt, not in the friendly way most Aussies use the term, and that alluded to wishing sexual violence on me. At the end of the semester, I submitted my report, knowing full well that the best I could hope for was a pass, but that was enough to get me through to my final year. The fallout. I found this out from Matt at the beginning of my final year at uni. So, It turns out that when Matt had booted the Dodgy brothers from the archaeological program, they had been allowed to continue on with their degree studying geology, but that they were not allowed to have anything to do with archaeology and were on very thin ice. When I submitted my report and Matt saw the extent of what they had done, kindly documented by themselves on the most part, and just how badly they had screwed me over. Gaza was fine, as the group he'd been moved to had all the appropriate data and had been able to submit a proper field report. He went ballistic. He called a meeting with the deans from both campuses, the Department of Tropical Environments and Societies, Geology Department, and the Department of Anthropology, Archaeology, and Society, Archaeology Department, for both campuses. He presented to them my field report, told them about how he'd been teaching me for the past 3 years, and had it not been for the illness affecting me during my second year, how I would have likely completed my degree at this point. He also spoke about my previous field school, my behaviour, and had I not been forced to withdraw due to my health, and based on previous work I'd submitted, I would have likely received a D or HD on my work. The fact that I averaged C and D during the time I was ill showed my academic prowess. The fact that the only grade he was able to give me for the report he currently had in his possession was a PC was a blow to my academic record. That was wholly undeserved. He said a lot of other things, but the end result was that Baza and Daza were not only expelled from the archaeological program, they were now booted from the geological one as well. Furthermore, they were expelled and blacklisted from the university itself, which meant they could never re-enroll, and any other universities they applied to would be able to see this and the reasons why. Essentially, they were blocked from being able to obtain any university degree in that area, and to enroll in any university for a different career. They would have to wade through oceans of bureaucratic red tape and jump through so many hoops they'd make the Duracell bunny jealous. Unfortunately, this experience soured me on archaeology as a career path. Luckily for me, I was able to pick up a couple of extra courses in history and English, that I graduated with a BA with a major in English literature and a minor in history and archaeology. I went back to uni after a gap year and obtained my grad, DIP, in secondary education. TL, DR. Immature twats decide to screw over my entire second semester course load during a group project by getting shit-faced and contaminating evidence and data needed. I write a final report on what they did, with evidence, which results in them getting kicked out of uni and blacklisted, screwing up their career prospects. ETA, including all social media platforms in regards to sharing. Also fixed some spacing. The revenge was really satisfying. Baza and Daza got what the bitter consequences of their actions. The blow was really satisfying when they get expelled and blacklisted from the university. It was really a brutal and career-destroying revenge. The next story is from Lord S. Thor. He punched me over a fender bender. I destroyed his life. I was working as a civilian with the US military overseas, and I lived off base in an apartment complex popular among the US military. One morning, I accidentally hit another soldier's vehicle. Upon exiting the vehicle, I noticed that both our vehicles were what you could call a hoopty. A hoopty is an old car that is pretty beat up that has been passed around from service to service member, and they generally sell for $1,000, $2,000. I also recognized that I was at fault for the accident. It was a very minor accident. His rear bumper was dented in slightly, but I could hear both our cars still running. I approached the driver who had already gotten out, and he was in uniform, and I apologized and said, if it was all right with him, I'd like to negotiate a payment that I will pay him in cash, and we don't involve the authorities. I wanted to keep this simple. I'll be honest, the accident was so minor, I honestly expected him to say, nah man, it's good. But even if he wanted some money, I'd have paid him. I have always been of the opinion, if you have a fender bender and can negotiate agreeable terms between both the parties, it's best to not involve insurance police. He told me he wanted to call the police. I said we could call the police, or we could go on base together and I could give him $300. He said that wasn't enough. So I upped my offer to $500. He proceeded to punch me in the face. It was a sucker punch. He got into his car and took off, and in the process nearly ran me over. Now I had a black box in my car which recorded everything. I went to the Provost Marshal office on base, the police station, and reported the accident and the assault and showed the MP the footage, which they used his license plate to track him down. I was also asked if I wanted to involve the local authorities, press criminal charges off base. Honestly, I felt like the soldier would learn his lesson if I let UMCJ, the military court, basically handle this. And I said, not at this time. I was told it was an option. The end result was the soldier in question got 60 days of extra duty, reduction in rank, and forfeited a portion of his paycheck. Essentially, if he dealt with that, this would have been the end of the whole ordeal. Honestly, at this point, I assumed our little ordeal was over. Well, a few days after his punishment was decided on, which was not long after the incident itself, I was in the commissary, grocery store on base, shopping when the soldier who assaulted saw me and began to insult me. I told him he needed to calm down, that he should learn his lesson. He told me I was a pussy who didn't know how to take a punch. I reminded him that I held back on destroying his life. He told me he's already been punished and I can't touch him again. He left me be. A store employee witnessed the entire encounter and I got the employee detail and reported this interaction to his command. His commander told me he had been ordered to not interact with me and would take action. His commander also recommended I involve the local authorities since this soldier obviously isn't learning his lesson. So I did. I contacted an attorney. The attorney was unsure if we could successfully sue the soldier and said he would need a cash payment to take the case. Honestly, I was mad and I wanted to teach this guy a lesson. I agreed. It was not cheap. To keep this story short, we ended up in a court off base. We presented our evidence. The soldier in question had decided to represent himself. Several times in the court, he had outbursts. The judge ended up granting me a judgment of approx. $50,000 USD. When the judgment was given, the soldier called the judge a son of bitch and that the army would cover for him. So the judge changed his judgment to $80,000, and the judge then asked me if I also wanted to press charges against this soldier in criminal court. Honestly, it was obvious this guy wasn't going to learn a lesson. I told the judge I wanted to pursue criminal charges in addition to the judgment. My lawyer later advised me that if I ever wanted to see the money, I should pursue an international hold. With my judgment, it's likely that a judge would grant me an international hold. An international hold is basically where this soldier would not be allowed to leave the country until I was paid my $80,000. Also, he told me that according to the agreement between the US military and the host country, the US military would honor the international hold. Basically, the US military would not protect him or move him out of country to avoid punishment. Honestly, by this point, I had paid my lawyer thousands of dollars, and I honestly didn't feel like paying thousands of dollars and getting nothing for it. So I said, yes, I want to go forward with the international hold. About a month later, the international hold was granted, and the US military was informed of this. 2 months after that, the criminal case was over, and the soldier was sentenced to 90 days in jail. By this point, the soldier had been moved onto the base into his barracks by his commander. I remember the day I was informed the MPs handed him over to the local authorities to begin his 90-day jail sentence. Did I mention he still owed me $80,000? I heard nothing for a year, and then, one day, I get a call from his commander. His commander wants me to make a statement in regards to the case. I go in and make the statement. During the statement, I find out the US military was in the process of chaptering the soldier out of the US military. The commander also informed me that he was close to coming up with the money to pay me so he could have the international hold lifted. The commander also asked me if my lawyer would be willing to make a statement. I contacted my lawyer, who also made a statement about the facts of the case. A few weeks later, His ex-wife contacted me. When this all started, I knew he was married. Guess his wife decided to divorce him. She informed that his ex-husband had the money and needed the details on how to pay me. I provided her the details, and a few days later, I got the payment and contacted his ex-wife to inform her I had been paid. She then asked me to send a receipt so he could have the international hold lifted and returned to the States. I asked her how he got the money. She said he maxed out his credit and also had family help out. Also during this conversation, I had found out the army had chaptered him out of the military. I sent her the receipt and that was the last I ever heard from his side. TL. Data. I get into a fender bender with a soldier. I try to resolve things with him. He punches me. He gets UCMJ action, a civil judgment, 90 days in jail, a divorce. I actually do not know if the divorce is connected, but I imagine this case didn't help his marriage. A ton of debt and a loss of his career. I took his $80,000 and bought myself a brand new car and used the rest of the money to put down on an investment property. FAQ. This post blows up. I turned off inbox replies because it was too much, so I felt like answering some common questions. Am I worried about the guy getting revenge on me? No, he's back in the States, I'm still overseas. He most likely has a criminal record, which means he wouldn't even be allowed past immigration. Plus, since then, I've taken a new job, moved, etc. Not connected to his incident, just how things are. Plus, this happened many years ago. The amount seems high. The actual amount was in a foreign currency, and I rounded up and adjusted figures, but it was very high. I did suffer from a black eye, and his behavior after the fact didn't help. Also, this incident happened in an Asia country during a time period in which we had several other high-profile incidents with US service members screwing up. My incident was not high-profile at all, but that all played a role. Honestly, I expected around 15K, 20K. Also in this country, settlements for damages are based upon your ability to pay and tend to be on the higher side. I think the court also thought he was an American and could afford it. However, the amount even shocked my lawyer. Why did his commander recommend I take this to civil authorities? I got the feeling his commander was tired of this soldier. I suspect I wasn't the first incident. What country did this happen in? I don't wish to disclose that, however, several people in the comment section have guessed correctly. Actually, someone who was familiar with the incident PM'd me. So this blew up more than I intended. I will say this. It happened in Asia, in a country with a large troop presence. Why did I go so far? Honestly, that was never my intention. In fact, I decided to report to the military instead of going straight to the local authorities, because I figured doing so would allow us to deal with the issue in-house, and his punishment would be limited. I was right. He didn't learn his lesson. However, once I got the local authorities, my lawyer involved, it turned into something I didn't expect. Also, by the time that dust had settled, I had paid my lawyer a significant sum of money, had to use up my vacation days. In total, this entire incident cost me many thousands of dollars in lawyer costs, vacation time, etc. So, I did want my money back at that point. Why did he get a jail sentence for simple assault? So in this country, they do not like to give suspended sentences to foreigners. I suspect a local national would have gotten a suspended sentence. I do have a local national friend who was involved in an assault many years ago and he got 90 days suspended sentence. However, my guess is the judge gave him jail time instead of suspended sentence because he was a foreigner. However, I was not involved very much in the criminal case. Questions about his wife, ex-wife. Truth be told, I don't know much about this. I do not know if she was his ex-wife because of this or not. I also never saw his ex-wife in person, the only involvement I had with her, at the very end. This revenge was brutal and destroying. A mistake of the soldier makes him pay 80,000 USD and 90 days in jail. It was really a destroying revenge. If he had behaved in a reasonable manner, he might have not faced all this. The revenge was really mind-blowing. Very interesting pro-revenge Reddit story from Judas697734. HOA yells at me for training guide dog and grilling, then loses position on board. To start the story, some background you need to know about me. I volunteer to train and raise service dogs. My fiancé says I clearly have a look that says I am weak and a pushover. I have constant encounters with Karens who are just not ready for my responses when they engage me. I have been in the military for 17 years when this happened, and I was responsible for managing over 130 service members. I am anything but a pushover. I work with civilians, so I have cultivated a polite exterior because I was counseled for looking unapproachable and scary to civilian counterparts. The story, as I said, I raise service animals, so I fall under the ADA when it comes to regulations on where and what I can do with my puppy. We'll call him OO, is an amazingly well-behaved black lab of 6 months. I have cultivated a level of trust and obedience where I can leave him in a sit with other dogs around so long as I am in eyesight, he will stay. I have raised a few pups by then, and I would never have done that with them. But O is amazing, and I can't wait to get him back after his tour of duty helping Mrs. C be independent. I met the HOA Karen one Saturday. My fiancé and I were going to head on a road trip to visit my fiancé's parents. In our preparation, the last on the list is always getting the kids to use the bathroom before a long trip. So we head out, O gets busy, and I grab a bag to clean it up. I put him in a sit-stay and hand the leash to my girl. I start walking to the trash can. It's about 100 feet from where he went. I have a clear line of sight to the dog, and he is sitting pretty and alert, watching me intently for a hand cue or voice command. As I am walking, I hear a womanly screech. I don't quite make it out, but it sounds angry. I ignore it and keep walking to the dumpster, deposit my waste bag, and turn around to head back to my two favorite people. It is then I make eye contact with the HOA Karen from here on out. She is your typical Karen, not an inch over 5 feet, and has the same circumference. The short cropped hair that says, "I'm the manager now." She looks me in the eyes, and I finally listen to her shrill scream of, "Your dog must be on a leash, and in your hand, my county state law says so, I will call the cops." Now, I don't do ignorant, and respect given is respect earned. I was willing to try and de-escalate. My fiancé owns the condo and is super non-confrontational. So for her, I try to bring it back down to civil levels of discussion. In a polite but firm voice, I asked if she even looked over at the dog before she started yelling at me. She just bellows like a banshee again. I repeat. This back and forth happens 3 or 4 times. Me calm, her escalating in pitch and volume. At this point, she hasn't given respect, so none is required to be given back. I break out my "you done fucked up" NCO to junior voice. It is loud, firm, and clearly states I'm done with your bullshit, lady. I clearly tell her if she would have taken 2 seconds to look, she would see the dog is sitting on a leash in someone's hands. She stops bellowing at me, looks, and turns a bit red in the face, then musters, "You could just say thank you." Which I curtly reply, "Shut the fuck up and get out of my face." She waddled quickly off, tail tucked into her condo door. My next meeting with her was when I was grilling. The HOA states no charcoal grills and no smoking BBQ. I was born in the north, but as a military brat moved to the south since I was 2. There is a difference between BBQing and grilling. BBQ is 12 plus hours with coals of hardwood or wood smoking. Grilling is cooking meat on a grill instead of the stove. The HOA put out a reminder, no BBQing on the premises and no coals. So I was like, awesome, get a small propane grill. It's not BBQ, but it's better than nothing. So I was out grilling, and I hear the banshee cry all too familiar now. Again, she didn't come up to me and talk. She just started screaming. So I looked her right in the eye and with the same firm voice, "Shut the fuck up and go away. If you say one more word, I'll be the one calling the cops for harassment by an HOA member." She sputtered something about no grilling or open flames, and I told her to fuck off, show me in writing, and by someone other than her. She waddled off, And then I was approached by the HOA president with the HOA bylaws and sat to read them, during which my fiancée started a conversation with them about another issue we were having with them. She was in the middle of having the state attorney's office ask some questions about activities they were trying to force her into paying for. It wasn't going well for the HOA, and she took this opportunity to introduce herself. While she may be non-confrontational when it comes to small things, she will stand up for herself when it comes to it. Her introducing herself changed everyone's tone, and they became, oh, so polite. Karen tried to play the victim to her and say I was mean and could use some manners when engaging with people. I love my soon-to-be wife. She let her paint her tale of how she was a victim. When she finished, she looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You know, I was the one holding the leash, and I was standing right here when he was grilling. So no, you got the same respect you gave." She paled and faded to the back. That's when the president of the HOA stepped in and told me I can't have the grill and that I can be fined, and I needed to follow the rules of the HOA, or the next time he'll be the one calling the cops. Well, press Roger that. It is my job to enforce regulations in the military. I spend hours reading instructions. Nothing pleases me more than when I can shove the black and white in an asshole's face at work to get my guys what they are owed or to force them to do the job right. So you want me to follow the rules? Copy that, buddy. So I began my research. I found a few interesting things. No HOA bylaw can be enforced if it is not in the state database. This particular HOA's bylaws were last updated in 1994. It was 2016. They state they follow my county's fire code, which follows NFPA. Finally, the gem, the exact latitude and longitude coordinates of the HOA's property lines. So I got a login for the state's database and printed the HOA's bylaws. I printed the NFPA, which states in a multifamily home you can store propane tanks no bigger than 2.7 litres, but they can total no more than 5.4 litres cumulatively. I went to Lowe's, got a rope, tape measure and stakes. I pulled up Google Maps and marked the HOA boundary line on it. Lo and behold, what do I find? A drainage ditch that is city property not 10 feet from where I was grilling. So I took my coordinates, my stakes, and carefully marked off the section of city property. Now for the revenge, I called the city county fire departments and requested a permit to grill on said city property. They said, go for it. I didn't need a permit for it. No one would care. I insisted, and they said it's my $50. They issued an event open flame, so with both permits it was $100. But I got permission from the city to grill there for 6 months. The next day at 0700, I went to set up. I carefully measured so I was at least 3 feet into the city property, set up my cooler with enough meat and beer to grill till doomsday. Then waited for the fireworks. It didn't take long for Karen to come screaming at me. I mean, I was 10 feet from the community pool and 3 feet from the sidewalk gazebo that led to the pool. I just hit record on my phone and politely told her she has no need to yell, and I am breaking no laws. She kept screaming about no grilling and how she is tired of me and she is going to get me arrested and kicked out if it's the last thing she does. She hasn't liked me since she saw me and has just been waiting to get me kicked out. That now that she knows which condo is mine, it is just a matter of time till she finds something. On and on. I guess me being polite and showing zero fear was pissing her off. She tried to come take my stuff. Big no-no. As she reached for my cooler, I broke out my NCO voice and told her if she so much as brushes a finger against my property, I would remove the offending body part with force if necessary. This sent her scurrying off again. About 20 minutes later, I see 2 cop cars pull up and Mr. HOA press himself. He is all chummy with the cops, and as they approach, I hear him say, "Yep, same guy. I already told him once before he can't grill on the HOA grounds." He comes to a stop about 10 feet from me. One cop stays with him, the other keeps walking up to me. I have a shit-eating grin on my face. I can hardly wait for the conversation to happen. The cop is slightly off-put by my joyous face and slight giggle when I ask, "What seems to be the problem, officer?" I get informed that I am in violation of the bylaws and have been warned once already, and I am going to receive a ticket for disturbing the peace for threatening the HOA when they were trying to enforce the rules. A ticket for an illegal open flame, a ticket for illegal storage of flammable substances, and on and on. The last was if I didn't pack up, I would be arrested and removed. Now that he was done, I first handed him my permit from the city to grill. He took it, walked back to the pres, and they discussed it for a moment, then returned, saying, "You can't get a permit from the city to grill on private property." I then showed him the coordinates for the HOA and the Google Maps gridded drawing and my current GPS location. Mind you, I am smiling, handing sheet after sheet to him because the grid was not all on one sheet and had addendums. It took about 4 minutes to explain it to him. As I was about to hand him more, he held up a hand to stop me. He then asks how long I had planned this with a smirk. I told him, "Oh, about a week." He gave me a look of disbelief, but moved on. He then asked me if I threatened Karen. I just played back the recording to him. At the end, he said, "Nothing seems out of place here. You are free to go." I stopped him and asked if I could file a complaint for HOA harassment through him. He said no, that the city clerk's office is the correct place, but he would document harassment by the two of them and file the report for me. In my state, it's illegal to be harassed by the HOA. It comes with jail time of a few months, fines as high as 5K, and immediate removal from the board and the possibility of recovery of damages. I settled for them both being removed from the board instead of filing a complaint. I waved to Karen every day I grill or showed her my leash if I had O. The revenge was masterclass and was executed flawlessly. By leveraging city regulations, OP legally grilled on public property, showcasing meticulous research and planning. When confronted by the HOA and police, he confidently presented permits and GPS evidence, exposing their harassment. The ultimate satisfaction came when both the HOA president and Karen were removed from the board, leaving him victorious and unbothered. Very interesting pro-revenge story from an unknown account. That's not your car, lady. So this happened around 2008. My buddy Brock had gotten out of the military after 10 years. He'd started in the Marines, but transitioned into the Army for the last 4 years before buying a house in Texas. When he got out, he did a variety of jobs before landing a gig with a repo service. He worked there for a year and had a lot of wild stories, but this one sticks out the most as he helped a fellow soldier get revenge on an evil ex. Brock was at the office speaking with his manager, whom I'll refer to as Karen. Now, this particular Karen had a lot of Karen-like qualities, but was a force for good if you can believe that. While they were talking, they see a young man enter the office. They immediately noticed he had 2 black eyes and an arm was in a sling. The young man, whose name I unfortunately never learned but I'll call Ben, asked how hard it would be for them to help repossess his car. Karen called her daughter in, Karen Jr., and had her poor Ben a cup of coffee. Karen then asked Ben to tell her a story. Ben began with telling her that he had just returned from a deployment. He had been dating a local girl that lived outside of the famous Fort Hood, not a good idea BTW, before the deployment. Thanks to a previous deployment, he had managed to get himself a used black Dodge Charger, which was his baby. He further explained that shortly after buying the car, he had met the local girl, who for the sake of the story, I'll call Morgan. Morgan was always asking to drive his car, but he would always decline. When he was getting ready for his deployment, Morgan repeatedly asked if she could borrow the car, but he kept saying no. After much needling, he relented, but on the condition that she take care of his apartment until he comes back from rest and relaxation leave. She agreed. Ben left for his deployment while Morgan took care of his place. When Ben came back for leave, he found his apartment immaculate. He pulled his car from storage, drove to Morgan's. He spent a few days with her before handing her the keys and heading to his home state to visit family before returning to his deployment. He returned again from his deployment and found nothing but trouble. When he walked into his apartment, he found a layer of dust on just about every surface. It was almost like no one had been there in months. When he checked his bedroom, he'd found his room had been torn apart. All of his drawers had been searched and upturned. He tried to call Morgan, but never received an answer. He located his safe, which was hidden, and found it hadn't been touched. He then grabbed his spare key from the safe, called a buddy of his, and they went to Morgan's. As they pulled up to Morgan's, he saw a car there that he initially didn't recognize, but as they got closer, he realized it was his baby. Morgan had the car painted hot pink and put 24-inch spinners on it. He tried the key just to make sure, and the lights flickered as it unlocked. While his buddy laughed, Ben went to the front door and Morgan answered. He asked what happened to his car, and she responded, "It's my car now." Ben walked away and hopped in his hot pink mess. As he started it, 4 large dudes came out of Morgan's house, one with a baseball bat, and yanked Ben out of his car. They proceeded to beat the crap out of him in the driveway before his friend intervened, pulling his conceal and carry pistol on the group. He then took Ben to the hospital. I'm honestly not sure if the cops were called on this. I'd assume yes, but even then Ben said his friend drove by Morgan's house a handful of times while he was in the hospital at random times and the car was never there. Karen stared at Ben for a bit before asking for the paperwork. Ben handed it to her and Karen had a smile form on her face. She then asked Ben for Morgan's phone number. Ben gave it but wasn't aware of what was about to happen. Karen handed the phone to Karen Jr., who then dialed the number. Karen Jr. then began speaking to Morgan, telling her that they'd met at one of the local clubs and wanted to know if she was down to party that night. Apparently Morgan agreed, and the plan was set. Brock parked his tow truck at the club and waited. Sure enough, Morgan showed up with the pink monster, parked it, and went inside with some girlfriends. Brock gave them 5 minutes before he stealthily drove up to the car and hooked it up. As he was pulling out with the pink monster, Morgan walked out of the club. She saw her car in the tow truck and began trying to flag Brock down, but he was already out of there. The next day, it was business as usual at the office when Morgan called. She was furious that her car was stolen by them and wanted it back. Karen, using her best customer service voice, told her if she had the registration, she could come pick it up. Morgan began screaming louder that she was going to call the cops, at which point Karen sarcastically told her, "Please do," then hung up on her. As this phone call was going on, Brock happened to look out the window and saw Morgan standing next to a car in a vacant lot, throwing what appeared to be a temper tantrum. After Karen hung up, Brock watched her get in the car on the passenger side. Karen then looked out the window and had Brock verify it was her. She then began to smirk. Karen then proceeded to call the owner of the property Morgan and her friend were occupying. She told the owner about the car and asked if he wanted it towed. The owner okayed it. Brock then drove his truck over to the ladies in the car and introduced himself. They tried to explain that they were waiting for Morgan's boyfriend, but Brock insisted they weren't allowed to park there. They argued and called him every name in the book. Brock then hooked up their car and lifted it partially off the ground, forcing the two to exit the vehicle. They tore into him until he showed them the tow order. While this back and forth was going on, Ben arrived at the office and Morgan saw him walk in. She ran to the office door and Brock proceeded to lower the car. When Brock went back to the office, all hell had broken loose. Morgan apparently tried to snag the keys back from Ben, but he pocketed them. She began to hit him in his hurt arm and warned Ben that she'd call her friends to finish the job if she didn't get her keys back. Karen Jr. had already called the cops at this point, and Brock got in between Ben and Morgan, even telling Morgan to try hitting him to find out what would happen. Morgan then tried to play the pity card and said she only wanted the keys to get her laptop out for school. Karen asked Ben to hand the keys over to Brock so he could grab the laptop. Brock retrieved the laptop from the car, and as he was handing it over, she rushed to aggressively grab it, but knocked it from Brock's hands. Completely furious at this point, Morgan accused Brock of dropping the computer on purpose and threatened to sue. The cops then arrived, and Morgan began her sob story again, telling the police that they stole her car. The police questioned Karen, and Karen gave her casual smirk while asking if they wanted to see the security videos. The police watched and listened as Morgan punched Ben several times, and heard the threats she made about sending her friends after him. The police then turned to Morgan, who had turned ghost white at this point. She tried to back her way to the door, but the police stopped her. They proceeded to ask about the car, Ben's injuries, and who she planned on sending after him. She initially denied everything, but they already had evidence on her beating him up. She was arrested, and Ben got his car back. After the cops left, Ben admitted he didn't want to be seen in a car that looked like it was advertising Pepto-Bismol and planned on trading it in for a GTO. We later heard through the grapevine that the 4 guys who beat up Ben were arrested. Morgan had ratted them out. Brock had a few more stories, but none of them were nearly as good as this one. Edit. Damn, barely an hour and it's blown up a bit. Thanks, guys. Also, TL, DR evil girlfriend, tried to steal a car from her boyfriend, had him beat up, but a friendly Karen helps get it back. Edit 2. Wow, thanks for all the support, guys. I love that so many have enjoyed this story. So I've had a few people try to refute this story, and I assure you, this story is true. I have no reason to lie to anyone about this. Also, some people are asking how this is considered pro-revenge. While Ben didn't personally get the revenge, Karen was the instrument of Morgan's destruction. She set Morgan up to lose the car after Ben and his friend couldn't locate it on their own. Morgan's fate was more or less her own doing. She believed that she could strong-arm an injured man with multiple witnesses while making threats. Also, while gang activity was fairly high in the Killeen, Teek's area I'm not 100% on if they were connected to any gangs. I just want to throw that last part out there. The revenge was really satisfying and cool. Kudos to Ben's friends who helped him get his car back. It would have been impossible for Ben to get his car back on his own. Ben's ex-girlfriend got what she deserved, and it was a big win for Ben. It is truly satisfying to see Ben getting arrested. The next story is from Flight Geek 24. Don't cheat on your graduation lifeline. Suai, 19mem, and my now ex, GF, 18F, have been together for more than a year. We were in the same class during middle school and high school now. A 2-year friendship eventually evolved into a relationship. You all know how it is. We were happily together, at least so I thought, since December 2019. I thought everything was great between us the whole time, although recently, about March, I noticed her becoming very distant and barely writing first, dry texting, etc. I asked her multiple times if everything is okay and gave her some space, but it continued for the next few months. I was naturally very upset as I've been through hell and back together with her when she was going through depression and a really hard time at the end of 2020. It suddenly felt like all this time was wasted and worth nothing. I, as a naive high schooler, truly believed that she was the one. It was serious after all. We matched perfectly together. We spent about 3 full months crying together at night when she was going through a rough time. We had similar plans for the future, similar interests, and it seemed we were meant for each other. My GF, let's call her Caroline, was studying to become a lawyer, so she was mostly into humanities subjects. I, on the other hand, am studying biochemistry for medical school. I apologize if this is all confusing, different. We live in Europe. She was required to attend at least one science subject to graduate: physics, biology, chemistry, psychology. She always hated these subjects and just took them because they were necessary to graduate. She ended up picking chemistry as I was a natural and tutored 9 and 10 graders chemistry in my free time, and I always helped her with assignments, etc. It started as helping her before exams and assignments so she could get a good pass grade, and after her rough time warped into me, writing half of the assignments for her. In February, she started to do everything with me again though. We had online the whole time. Anyways, enough backstory. After noticing Caroline started to get distant and she never properly answered my questions regarding her behavior, I wanted to see how far it would go. For 1 week, I didn't invite her, call her, text her first. In a total of 1 week, she called me 3 times. Twice to ask me about her assignment, and once telling me how she felt insecure and bad. I'm not a dickhead. I helped her out with her school stuff and comforted her when she felt down. Me being the naive, love is perfect lovebird, I am chalked it up to her feeling depressed again, but feeling embarrassed about it. I continued helping and comforting her for the next month until nothing changed, and she never opened up. I was honestly doubting everything by then. Is it me? What am I doing wrong? Etc. I tried everything I could. Eventually, I asked her friends if something had happened, but they said she was the same as always towards them. I knew something was up, but I didn't know what it was yet. One day, when she came over to my place, it was only the second time she had done that in March. Usually she came at least twice a week. We were sitting in my room and talking while she was trying out Valorant. After she went to my kitchen to make herself something, I hear a notification from her phone. I'm usually not a snooper, but I had a quick look at her screen that lit up. I wouldn't be able to read the message or who it was anyway. It was a Discord notification. I was very surprised. I knew for a fact that she didn't have it a month ago. Plus, she only plays Minecraft once in a while. She never uses Discord or anything. So the next morning, I did some snooping, and sure enough, I found a whole other Instagram account of hers, where she branded herself to be an aesthetic gamer girl. Not that there is anything wrong with that. She had never told me anything about this. I couldn't find any of her friends following her on that account either. Sure enough, she had her Discord username in her bio. Curious and TBH asshole me decided it would be a good idea to create a throwaway account and try to text her to see what she was all about. Before you complain to me, I know I was an asshole here. After texting her on my new account, we talked for a bit until she became flirty. We played a few Bed Wars games together, once again on a throwaway account I bought for $1 LMAO. I kind of broke down and started questioning my sanity. I had been with her all this time, and through so much I couldn't believe she would do this to me. After the sadness came from the anger, I wanted to know how much she took it. I found it hard to believe that she would just casually flirt with guys like this. After setting up my first recon mission plan, I found out more about her until I found out about her supposed boyfriend. At that point, I had a huge emotional breakdown, and I felt I've wasted so much time helping someone who would betray me like this. From her stories, I would later find out they were sleeping with each other for a whole month by now, about when her behavior started to change. At this point, I started hatching my revenge plan. I know I would not let her off the hook this easily. I spent 2 weeks pulling all-nighters, making sure I had all my work done till the end of the year, until graduation. I spend all my remaining time creating fake chemistry textbook pages so I could make my pro-revenge more believable. All of the information was wrong. I knew I had to give her a taste of her own medicine, betray her like she had me. For the remaining 2 months of the school year, O fed her all this fake information and made sure she got all of her assignments wrong. I knew she wouldn't be able to tell anyone she was copying off me, as our high school had a very strict rule for plagiarism. As much as 3 small cheating attempts on small exams could get you expelled. So after letting the pot stew for those 2 painful, awful months, I let the hit the fan. As our teacher had to handle an outrageous amount of classes, she always checked our assignments late, often by 2 or 3 months all at once. I knew I could use this fact to my advantage. After she submitted her final assignments that were worth a huge percentage of our final graduation grade, I told her I knew about her shenanigans had been still ongoing for 3 entire months by now. I told her how she hurt me and how it will come back to haunt her. I made sure of that. She mostly brushed me off and acted as if I were the villain, as I couldn't just leave her and that she was only friends with that guy. Although I told her something was going to happen, I never told her what it would be. Trust me, she never saw it coming. 1 week later, the end-of-year results rolled around. When we received our final grades, I was over the moon as I passed with flying colours. On the other hand, her not so much. Due to her final assignments and all quarter 4 work equaling to an F, she called me crying and asked for help. She told me she wouldn't be able to graduate if she wouldn't receive at least a passing grade for this year. She told me our teacher gave her a final chance after telling her how disappointed she was. Caroline has 2 more months at school with extra one-on-one online lessons with our Saint teacher. Honestly, props go out to our teacher for giving her another chance. TBH, I felt really bad for her and her situation, knowing very well if she didn't work her ass off in these 2 months, in a subject she hated, she would have to repeat the last year, without someone constantly helping her with her chem. That compassion quickly went away, and I told her I would help her, but only if she apologized and paid me my regular tutoring fees. Caroline went full-on ballistic after that and screamed at me how I could do this to her. I hung up, and she called me a few seconds after, apologizing and agreeing to pay me for my help. She now has 2 months of intense memorizing with her ex if she wants to graduate. TL. DR. My GF cheated on me, so I fed her fake chemistry information and almost made her fail chemistry. Now she's paying me to tutor her. Edit. Now she has to study for those 2 months, and when the regular end of the school year comes, she has to complete a series of exams, think 4-8, covering the most important topics from this year. If she passes all of them, she will pass chemistry. Update 08.0621 June. Wow, I really didn't expect post to blow up whatsoever. Thanks you all Redditors for your support and contributions. Special mentions go out to r/, Redditor and Ask Goblin for featuring my stories in their YouTube videos. After 4 weeks of preparing, Caroline has actually learned a lot. She's even broken off contact with that guy, apologized, and taken me out to dinner a few times to show her gratitude for still helping her. I hope she was actually able to realize what mistakes she committed in the past and won't do the same again. She was able to take her first exam today in the morning and is quite confident about it. Her next 5 will be spread along the next 2 final weeks. She will find out if this extra work is enough latest on the 23rd of June. I keep you guys update on further details and events that are relevant to this story. Once again, thank you all for your support. Update. So firstly, I apologize to all of you for this late update, but I was quite busy with collage applications, moving, etc. It's been a long way for Caroline, but she's made it and completed all criteria required to graduate. She's also gotten into quite a good university, and she's learned a lot, not just chemistry, but she's actually gotten a much better work ethic and motivation to do stuff she doesn't enjoy. In the meantime, I've moved on and am with someone new. We're still friends, but set clear boundaries as to not repeat history once again. I'm very happy the way things are as I've gotten into my first choice medical college. I've already moved out about 2 weeks ago, and I'm living in the same city as before because it's a major European city and has great universities. Caroline's collage is located in a different country and she's moving tomorrow. We've met today to say goodbye, but we plan to keep in contact, as mentioned before, only as friends. The revenge was both clever and satisfying. By turning the tables on Caroline, OP ensured she faced the consequences of her betrayal. However, what OP did in the end was kind of him. Kudos to the man. The very interesting pro-revenge story from Bama Fan 4. Jesus. Newly hired youth minister got me kicked out of church for no reason. I found out he had been screwing a deacon's wife, and I helped the deacon ruin his life. TLDR. Church youth minister spread false rumors about me and got me kicked out of the church I had attended my whole life for no reason other than pure meanness. I found a guy who hated him even more than I did, and I gave the guy information that he used to do a very artful and thorough job of completely ruining the youth minister's life. He got fired and blacklisted, couldn't find another job. By chance, I saw him several years later working a shitty job. Sweet. About 6 to 7 years ago, I was a ministerial student at a conservative Christian college. I had attended the same Bible-believing church since I was a small child. It was large, about 1,000 members, but not a megachurch. This church had been an enormous part of my life for as long as I could remember. I played piano for youth choir, preached at the children's church service, which was held in the church's chapel at the same time as the adult service, drove the church bus to pick up unchurched children, etc., and ad infinitum. I did all of this for free, not even getting reimbursed for expenses. During my senior year in college, we got a new Minister of Music, Education and Youth. This guy was as charming as an ice cream sundae with razor blades in it. I'll call him Mr. Charming. All of the deacons and their wives thought he walked on water. He was an authoritarian asshole. In his first meeting with the church youth group, he announced that he had been hired to straighten out the youth group. One of his favorite sayings was, "When I tell my disciples jump, The only questions they get to ask are how high and how far. The adults loved him, and the youth hated him. Within a few weeks, half of the high school and college students, i.e., all of those without parents in the church, had quit coming to church. Most youth directors would have gotten into trouble over this, but he had the audacity to proclaim, in front of the entire congregation in the Sunday morning worship service, that he had eliminated all of the thorny ground from the youth group, a reference to the parable of the sower in the Bible. And the pastor and all of the deacons loved him for it. He didn't waste any time going after what he really wanted, the pastor's job. The pastor, whom I'll call Pastor T, was about 60 years old. Within a few weeks of Mr. Charming's arrival, rumours started circulating about Pastor T's health. He was an avid runner and cyclist, and that he just didn't seem to be as mentally sharp as he used to be. He frequently quoted long Bible passages from the pulpit, entirely from memory without misstating a single word, sometimes in Greek or Hebrew. Worst of all, however, was the accusation that he was really too liberal for the church. In my denomination, it is the kiss of death to even be suspected of being a liberal. None of these accusations made any sense, but people kept talking about them. I have no idea why the pastor didn't find out. Or maybe he did find out and was just too scared to do anything about it. In some denominations, like Catholic or Methodist, the denomination assigns pastors priests. Not my church's denomination. Each church calls the minister. This guarantees that every pastor always walks a razor's edge. The slightest slip and you're out. You don't even have to slip. Maybe you even do the right thing and it still offends enough people. It doesn't take many, just a handful if they hate you enough. Then you're out. Or maybe, like Pastor T, some creep just lies about you and gets your job. And since the church often owns your house, the parsonage or manse, your entire family is suddenly homeless and destitute. Then I became a target. I still don't know why. A couple of months after starting to work for my church, Mr. Charming called me and informed me that my services were no longer needed at youth choir, children's church, bus ministry, anywhere. In fact, he said, he did not even want me to participate in any of these functions at all, not even go to the Sunday morning worship service. I later found out that members of his family had been hired by the church at very nice rates of pay to perform these functions that I'd been doing for free. His wife got paid more for playing a beat-up piano at the 1-hour youth choir rehearsal than the main organist pianist got paid for playing for adult choir rehearsal plus Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings, when the youth choir sang. The wife could barely pick out the notes on a piano. This lady radiated bitterness, resentment, and repressed anger. But she rarely said anything. She just sat there and glared, which was somehow even creepier than when she spoke. I was very hurt, emotionally, so I dropped by Pastor T's office and tearfully asked him what I'd done wrong. I couldn't get a straight answer, except he told me that people are saying things about me, and that if I wanted to get a good recommendation from him to our denomination's ministers' school, I'd better shut up and do what you're told. So, I started asking all of my church friends what people were saying about me. Everyone said, well, I didn't want to tell you, and I don't believe it, but here's what I heard. According to the rumor mill, I had gotten my girlfriend pregnant and forced her to have an abortion. I hadn't even had a girlfriend since junior high, and I'd been arrested for possession of marijuana, and my dad had to pay a bunch of money to hush it up. I didn't even know what pot looked like. There were other rumors, but you get the idea. I did what Pastor T told me to. I never darkened the door of that church again, except once, months later, see below. It hurt like hell. I'd devoted my life to that church since I was a little kid. But I had to have Pastor T's recommendation to get into the minister's school I wanted to go to, and the pain was unbearable just driving by there. So I decided to keep my distance. But I started thinking about Mr. Charming. Anyone who was that evil had to have a past, and it probably wasn't a good one. I knew that just before working for my church, he had worked at a large church in the same denomination in a small town about 50 miles away. That church was actually about twice the size of my church. So he had moved from a big church to the same job at a smaller church. A bad career move? Running away from something? Ah, there was something rotten in Denmark, and it smelled like an opportunity for me. As luck would have it, one of my uncles and his family lived in that same small town, although none of my family attended Mr. Charming's former church. So I called one of my cousins, told her my story, and enlisted her as a co-conspirator. I'll call her Anne. The next Sunday morning, Anne and I attended Sunday school and morning worship at Mr. Charming's old church. Although Anne had never been a member of that church, it was a small town where everyone knew everyone, so she knew most of the people there. She started asking about Mr. Charming and got an earful. Every one of her friends said that Mr. Charming was a world-class creep. He would flirt with and even make suggestive comments to all of the girls in the youth group, even those in junior high. He was 40-plus years old and had a wife and 3 children of his own. And then there was the touching. Never anything obvious or illegal, but he loved to put his hands all over the young ladies whenever their parents weren't around. But, just like at my former church, the adults loved him because he kept the youth in line. Our investigation went on for several weeks. I kept a low profile so as not to arouse suspicion. Mostly, I just stood around, ate donuts, drank coffee, and talked about football. Anne did most of the work because she knew so many people, and it was perfectly natural for her to attend this church in her hometown, even if it was not the church she usually attended. After church was over, we would go to her house, have a delicious Sunday lunch cooked by my aunt, and then write down everything we had learned. By then, Anne's whole family were in on my investigation. They were as angry as I was about the way I'd been treated, and our weekly report made interesting lunchtime conversation. Within a few weeks, I was sure that all I had to do was drive a few of these young ladies and their parents, friends of my aunt and uncle, down to my old church, let them tell their stories to the parents of a few girls in the youth group, and Mr. Charming would become Mr. Unemployed. But it kept getting better and better, so Anne and I kept digging. And I really wanted to keep a low profile if I could, because I didn't want to piss off Pastor T any more than I had to. He knew a lot of people in the denomination, and he could easily ruin my ministerial career before it even started. Finally, after a month or so, Anne grabbed me by the sleeve and said, "You've got to hear this." She introduced me to a well-dressed, very large guy, maybe 30, 35 years old. I'll call him Fred. We slipped off into a Sunday school room where we would not be overheard. It turned out that Mr. Charming had had a multi-year affair with Fred's wife. Fred had kept his cool when he found out, talked with a lawyer, and had spent months gathering evidence. Text messages, voicemails, emails, even photos and videos with Fred's wife, and Mr. Charming in them. Apparently, Mr. Charming got stimulated by watching videos of himself doing the wild thing with Fred's wife. Then Mr. Charming would send the videos to Fred's wife, and they both would have cybersex while texting each other. Later, they would hook up the old-fashioned way and make more videos. Finally, Fred confronted his wife. She denied everything, but the evidence was just too much. Fred told her he wanted a divorce, full custody of the children, their house, his retirement money, his business, her engagement and wedding rings, everything, even the dog. She hired a lawyer, but laws and courts being what they are in this rural Bible Belt county, her lawyer told her that if the judge saw the videos, she'd be lucky if she ended up in a homeless shelter with all of her worldly possessions under her bunk in a garbage sack. Then Fred turned his attention to Mr. Charming. Fred still sincerely loved his wife, and he was convinced that Mr. Charming had deliberately ruined his marriage. Taking Mr. Charming to court, suing him for loss of consortium and otherwise making him legally miserable would take too long. This is the rural Deep South. Many people around here prefer a more direct approach. In rural counties, the police and any jury of your peers will probably include people who have known you since kindergarten. So, if you have a good reason for your actions and you aren't too stupid about it, there are things that you can do. Fred scheduled an appointment with Mr. Charming in his church office, who did not suspect a thing because Fred was a deacon and his children were in the church youth group. Remember that I said Fred was big? 6 foot 6 inches at least, 300 pounds. And if there was an inch of fat on him, he hid it well. Looked like he could pull up a 100-foot oak tree by the roots without breaking a sweat. Fred told me that he brought several friends with him, and of course, the videos. One friend blocked the door. Another unplugged the phone. A third one stood behind Mr. Charming and encouraged him to stay seated in his chair. Fred made Mr. Charming watch about 10 minutes of one of the videos, then calmly said, "I'm going to stand here and watch you pack up your stuff. Then you're going to walk out of this building and never show your f***ing ass in this town again. Or we'll be back." Mr. Charming did as he was told. A month later, he had a new job at another church, my old church, and started ruining another whole set of lives, including mine. Fred actually did not know where Mr. Charming had gone. He had been led to believe that Mr. Charming had moved out of state. He was surprised, gratified, and angered to learn that this scumbag was only 50 miles away. This had all happened just a few months before. Fred was still deeply in love with his wife. They were getting counseling, and he hoped that they could save his marriage. But his hatred of Mr. Charming was still fulminating. Like Mount St. Helens a few minutes before the explosion. He presented such a face of restrained rage and vindictiveness that it scared me, and I wasn't even the one he was mad at. The next day, Monday, I drove back up there and gave him a copy of the directory of my old church. It had home addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses for pretty much every member of the church. I showed him the pages that listed all of the deacons and other church leaders, and I marked some of the church's major financial donors. I explained my situation with Pastor T and asked that my name not be mentioned. "No problem," he said. The next Sunday, I could not resist visiting my old church to see how things were going. Mr. Charming was nowhere to be seen, nor was any explanation given about what had happened to him. One weird thing, though, the pastor looked scared shitless. His voice, usually resonant, loud and almost musically baritone, trembled during the whole sermon. I slipped in just before the service started and made a point of sitting in the very front row, center pew. The look on his face when he saw me was worth all of my trouble. I didn't know it at the time, but Fred had gotten right to work and done a very thorough job. The whole church had gotten multiple anonymous emails with photos and videos of Mr. Charming and Fred's wife in various, compromising positions and stages of undress. Deacons and major donors got emails plus express mail packages just for good measure. Mr. Charming and Pastor T had been left out. They didn't know anything until the phone calls started pouring in. After the worship service, it did not take long for my church friends to figure out why I was there. It was very gratifying. I was something of a hero, although I kept swearing that I had no idea what they were talking about. Things continued to blow up in my former church for months afterwards. Both Pastor T and the pastor of Mr. Charming's old church almost lost their jobs because they had lied to my old church's committee of deacons, who had recommended hiring Mr. Charming, about why Mr. Charming had left his old job. But somehow they managed to stay in the pulpits at their churches, although a lot of church members left my former church, which caused some financial problems. There was talk of legal action for sending unsolicited porn to little old ladies and other people in the church. But nobody ever was able to prove that Fred did it. I don't think they tried very hard. After all, his wife was in the videos and photos. Both churches really did not want this to become a court case because of Mr. Charming's trysts, and the fact that he had spent years screwing a deacon's wife while he had unlimited, unsupervised access to dozens of church youth would then become a matter of public record. So they hushed it up. I never saw Pastor T again. I had lost all of the trust and respect that I had had for him, and I was sure that he had figured out that I was somehow connected to the whole fiasco. So my chances of having a preaching career in my denomination were precisely zero. By that time, being a pastor, like Pastor T, was the last thing I wanted anyway. I withdrew my application to minister's school and eventually completed a doctorate in archaeology at a different grad school, magna cum laude. I've been teaching at a large public university in the Midwest of the USA, with summer gigs on archaeological digs in Europe. And I am very happy. One last, very gratifying event. The reason for this post. All that happened 6 to 7 years ago. Fast forward to last March. I went to pick up a friend at a large downtown urban bus station in the US. Everyone hates this place. Not only is it crowded, it is poorly maintained and filthy. It smells like spoiled garbage mixed with diesel exhaust and seldom cleaned public restrooms. My friend's bus was late. I stopped by the newsstand to get myself a soda and candy bar. Who do you think was restocking the shelves? Mr. Charming. I just sat across from the newsstand and enjoyed my drink and snack. He recognized me, then turned away. I just sat and watched him, restocking shelves full of porno mags and junk food. Revenge is a feast that is best enjoyed cold. Wow. The revenge was really satisfying and cool. OP strategically take down the youth minister and brought him to the streets, exposing his true nature. It is a reminder that deceit will ultimately lead to downfall. It is satisfying to the young minister doing a menial job. Truly satisfying. The very interesting pro-revenge story from Relatively Sorrowful. My ex-advisor plagiarized my work, so I exposed her, and that cost her job. Just found out about this subreddit and had to share this story. The initial reason for the revenge happened in 2013, but the revenge only happened in 2017. I'll keep everything vague as not to be recognized. For context, back in 2013, I was a graduate student pursuing my master's degree. That was my last year in the program. We had 24 months to finish all the work and the dissertation. My advisor was a professor who was very well known and experienced on my field of work. Let's call her Janet, fake name. Janet and I had worked together with research since my college days as I became part of an undergraduate research with her. At that point, we had been working for about 4 years, and as any advisor-student relationship, we more had our disagreements quite often. Janet was used to doing her experiments a certain archaic way. I knew there were better uses of our grants money and always tried to push toward a more advanced method, especially correlating data collection and statistics. However, our relationship was always good. I knew her husband and had been to her house numerous times. She was a little set on her ways, but we managed to make good progress on our field. Anyhow, by the end of 2013, I presented my dissertation to the department and was approved with flying colours. My data still wasn't published in any paper, as I wanted to have more analysis in different areas to make a more robust and better paper. With that said, my dissertation was published, and by all reasons, that is my work and my experiments. After I got my MS, I decided to pursue a PhD. While I was still going to work in the same field, I wanted to use different techniques and thus talked with Janet about going to pursue a PhD under a different professor in another university. She always encouraged me to do better and look for ways to diversify my views. I went ahead and contacted a professor outside my country in another university to pursue my PhD. I got approved and soon moved away. For the next 2 years, I still kept contact with Janet, but on the third, she stopped responding. Initially, I thought she had changed her email or something, but didn't think much of it. Time flew by, and in 2017, while reading papers and writing my own, I came across a paper that was strangely similar with my research. Interested in it, I opened it up to read. For my shock, it was a paper by my ex-advisor. She was up as advisor, and another guy, who from his curriculum is her current master's student. Reading the title, I thought, hey, that's neat. She continued researching it. But boy, I was wrong. Reading the paper, I got increasingly angry. That wasn't a new research, it was my research. My data was all in that paper, even my graphs and tables. Initially, I thought, oh well, she's also an author, and if she is citing it, there shouldn't be a problem. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. My name was nowhere near that paper, as they claimed that research as original. Now, I was livid. I sent an email to Janet confronting her, which was never replied to. However, I'm not a pushover and will never allow people to claim my own work as theirs. She made a mistake by using my data. I'm a researcher and I keep everything I ever worked on saved in external SSDs encrypted and on my own possession. All catalogued with date entries, and even had my own dissertation to prove my work. In my country, research is financed by the governmental grants. I wrote an email to the Dean of the Grants Institution, explaining all the situation, with proof of everything. I also sent an email to Journal in which that was published, contesting their paper and explaining everything. It didn't take longer than 15 days for me to get a follow-up. The institution responsible for the grant was furious. They cut all financial aid for her and her student and made a formal requirement to the university requesting her immediate termination. The Journal retracted the paper and is now suing her for plagiarism. Now, after all these years, I learned that she was indeed fired and haven't been able to work in the field ever since. I never met her again and have no intention of ever doing so. Now, my work is published and I'm recognized by my contributions in the field. Maybe that was a petty thing to do, but I couldn't allow people to get away with claiming my work as theirs. Edit. Wow, didn't expect so many replies. Thank you for the words. A few things. The only reason I said it was petty is because since she is also an author, she has the right to publish it. But she needed to include me on the paper, which she didn't do. Also, there are laws in place on my country that allow the journal to sue her. This is not an international journal, that's why that happened. I work with medical research for those that asked, but I can't share the paper as that would easily identify me. Another thing, people have been questioning my terms. On my country, a master's candidate needs to present a dissertation and a PhD candidate needs to present a thesis. Sorry if I wasn't clear enough. Cheers. The revenge was really satisfying and cool. The advisor stole OP's data and published a paper, and OP dismantled her career. This was the best retaliation I have ever heard of. The next story is from Rogue Misanthrope. Employees' lunches are their personal property and the company is not responsible for lost or stolen personal items. Nobody likes a lunch thief, and I had one of the most aggressive at my office. There were rumours for a few months leading up to the inciting incident of someone going around and taking people's lunches. Just about every day, someone different would complain that their lunch was missing. It even happened to me once or twice, but I figured, hey, it's a big office. A few people are probably just careless and grab the wrong lunch and are too embarrassed to bring it back. Or someone else packs their lunch and they don't know what's in there, so it's not obvious they have the wrong one or whatever. Most people just brought brown bags with their names on it anyways, or identical Rubbermaid Tupperware with a little piece of labelled tape on the side. It was easy enough to mix it up. I had accidentally grabbed a wrong lunch once or twice, but I'd noticed before I got it open. I thought I was just more careful, or even just not as busy as some other people in the building. However, other people weren't as forgiving, and a quorum made complaints to HR. They were blown off. Personally, at the time, I thought it was all much ado about nothing. But then it began. My wife enrolled in a French cooking class online, and just about every day I was bringing fancy gourmand leftovers in for lunch. You'd think I was picking up a to-go bag from a Michelin-starred bistro on the way in each morning. She really threw herself into the coursework. There were no problems for about 2 weeks, maybe 3, until one day my lunch went missing. Considering what delicacies I had to look forward to, I was pretty miffed. But I did a once-over around the break room and didn't see anyone eating my lunch, so figured someone grabbed my bag by accident earlier, saw how good things looked and, realizing it was their lucky day, didn't bring it back to the fridge. I wrote the mysterious stranger off as an asshole, but accepted the loss and looked forward to dinner that night instead. Next day, I write my name on my lunch in extra bold lettering, jam the bag into the back of the fridge, and feel peace of mind. I get there, come break time. Nope, it's gone. I was pretty upset, but I figured it was a stroke of bad luck, and left it at that. What else could I do? However, third day, Out of an abundance of caution, I kept my lunch at my desk. A pain because I had to eat it fairly early in the day to avoid spoilage, but at least I'd know where it was. I got up to take care of some business down the hall, and when I came back, yep, my lunch was gone. Unfortunately, that didn't help me narrow it down much at all, because my desk is centrally located so everyone's constantly passing by. At that point, there was no possibility of the theft being arbitrary, so I approached HR and filed a complaint. Their response, practically verbatim, was, "Employees' lunches are their personal property, and the company is not responsible for lost or stolen personal items." The following day, my wife packed a cream-based soup that really had to be refrigerated. I was passing by the break room to check on my lunch practically every 5 minutes. Somehow, it still managed to disappear. I was irate at this point and returned to HR and really blew my top. The best they could do was send a memo around about remembering to check the name on your lunch when you remove it from the fridge, but they made very clear that it was a routine memo and in no way related to my complaints, which were not their jurisdiction, so not an admission of responsibility, because my lunch was my own personal problem. The only suitable alternative to packing a lunch available in the building are these wretched shrink-wrapped ham and cheese sandwiches from a vending machine. And they've been marinating in the heat for God knows how long, and the bread is as stale as corkboard, and the meat is rancid, and there's gluey mayo smashed into the center. It's a relic of the old office tenants, I'm pretty sure. I vented daily to my wife, but her only idea was to start bringing a regular sandwich and apple again to dissuade the thief and get him to move on to other lunches. So, determined to prevent this low-life scum from downgrading the quality of my lunch, I hatched an elaborate plan. Then the pandemic hit and I forgot all about this whole saga. I worked remotely for months and months. Then we returned, and after all that had happened globally, this was the last thing on my mind. But I got to the break room the first day back, frustrated from having to wear a button-up and tie after months of working in pajamas, sore from my desk chair, and exhausted from small talk, only to find my lunch was gone. This was a particularly sore point because my wife and I divorced between my last lunch and work and the present one, so I did not appreciate being reminded of any past threads involving her. I pretty much flew into a blind rage at that point, especially seeing that stupid, worthless memo about checking the lunch bag names posted in the break room, feeling so helpless and so hungry and so alone as it was me and my lunch against the world. I stormed out and was determined to return the next day with a plan. So I came in the following day with an empty lunch bag, and I checked closely to be sure no one was watching, and I switched the contents of the HR person's lunch bag into my bag. So now their lunch appeared to be my lunch. They'd packed a regular brown bag, so I just discarded that, and I left, and I waited. I knew this was a pretty big gamble because it was contingent on the theory that the thief was avoiding me while having lunch, but not wary of anyone else. So would eat out in the open if there were no risk of bumping into me. So I made a big show of going around the office, announcing that I was headed out for a meeting and I wouldn't be back until at least 3 p.m. I even went to the trouble of moving my car out of the lot to a space 2 streets over, where I then sat in my car and worked remotely for several hours before sneaking into the building up the back stairway. I then sat in the stairwell just outside the break room, where you can hear chatter can't be seen. And after about 20-30 minutes of waiting, I heard it. The sweetest sound I'll ever hear in the office. HR. "What the heck, Kyle? That's my lunch." "Lunch thief!" "Nah, it's not your name on the bag." HR. "Give me that." I'm assuming grabs bag and sees my name. HR. "Yeah, let's head to my office for a chat." The HR rep later called me in as well and said they were aware of my break room hijinks, but it was obvious that the point still came across loud and clear. They warned me that it was a violation of policy to move another employee's lunch. It took every ounce of self-control for me to keep from retorting, "I thought our lunches were our personal property, and the company was not responsible for them being lost or stolen." They informed me they'd located the thief and things would be handled accordingly. But better than whatever write-up they might be able to issue Kyle, his reveal as the lunch thief occurred in front of the whole break room. So word quickly spread as to who had been stealing everyone's lunches earlier last year, and he is now the office pariah. He was in line for a promotion. The promotion is indefinitely off the table. And I also earned brownie points for exposing him, though more than I'm satisfied with are being attributed to HR. At the end of the day, though, I didn't do this for this credit, or even the sweet, sweet, sweet revenge. I did it to get my lunches back. The revenge was masterclass, and OP executed it strategically, manipulating the thief to finally steal HR's lunch. It is also a sweet revenge on the HR who had told OP to take of his property and belongings on his own. It was truly satisfying.